Hello, everyone. And first of all, let me apologize on behalf of all of us for this slight delay today. Welcome to the final event of our methodology series of Research Stages, Shakespeare and Intersections of Research and Creativity with Sarah Ellis, Director of Digital Development for the Royal Shakespeare Company. With the event series methodologies, we are bringing together researchers, practitioners, and creatives, all who create new knowledge through research and the interrogation, disruption, and nuances of archives. Through this program, we have been encouraging you, the audience, to engage with our collections in new and innovative ways, to explore the possibilities for creative collaborations, and consider methodologies and practices that reach beyond traditional academic practice and outputs. Before we start the event today, as always, I will do a little bit of housekeeping. The session is approximately an hour. We started a little bit later, so we might probably overrun a couple of minutes, aiming to end around 2 or 2:10. We will begin with a presentation by today's speaker, Sarah Ellis, and this will be followed by a short conversation and the opportunity to ask Sarah any questions you might have. This event is being run through Zoom webinar, meaning you can ask questions by submitting them via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to submit your questions at any point throughout the event, and we will come back to them during the Q&A portion of today's event. My colleagues, TNA admin, will be sharing some guidance regarding the Q&A function in the chat, so you should see it there. Should you need any technical support during the event, please reach out to them via the chat and they will be able to assist you. Please also note that this event is being recorded and it will be uploaded to YouTube in due course. We have also enabled live captions, and you can access this at the bottom of your screen by clicking live transcript, show subtitle, or alternatively, you can hide this if you find them distracting by following the same process. I would like now to introduce our speakers today, Sarah Ellis. Sarah Ellis is an award-winning producer, currently working as Director of Digital Development for the Royal Shakespeare Company, to explore new artistic initiatives and partnerships. In 2013, she was listed in the top 100 most influential people working in gaming and technology by the Hospital Club and Guardian Culture Professionals. She has worked extensively with theatres, including the Old Vic Tunnels, South Bank Soho Theatre, Battersea Arts Centre, and the Albany, just to mention some. She is a regular speaker and commentator on digital arts practice, as well as an industry champion for the Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Centre, which helps inform academic research on the creative industries to lead better policies for the sector. As another information before we start the event, in 2021, the RSC became the first performing arts organization to be awarded Independent Research Organization status by the Arts and Humanities Research Council. RSC has subsequently been able to expand the research into a range of subjects, including the impact of theatre-led approaches in education and immersive technologies. Today, in conversation with the National Archives, a fellow independent research organization, Sarah and I will talk about the ways in which digital research can inform creativity and how the RSC has navigated the intersections of performance and emerging technologies to enhance engagement with Shakespeare to consider audiences for the future. Now, let me leave the floor to Sarah, who will talk about her work at RSC. Hi, Sarah.
Thank you. It's really brilliant to be here. I find these moments where I'm sort of sharing, like talking to you, but not seeing you. I always try and think about like a theatre space where the lights are turned off and it's that sort of vibe. It's a real privilege to be asked to speak with you in this moment, and big thanks to the National Archives for having me today. We connected in a previous iteration last year where we were sharing our practice, and it's interesting. It's sort of like, why the Royal Shakespeare Company is an independent research organisation. What does that mean? what does that look like? And in particular, what does artist-led research look like? And how can research inform creativity, as Georgia says? And in a way, everything is research when you are exploring a creative idea for the first time. But like what those areas of research are also really important to identify and codify. So my role at the RSC didn't start out as research, actually. It started out as recognizing the world was changing, recognizing how we were consuming culture was changing, recognizing how the speed in which our world was changing also, and how could we experiment with new forms of liveness, how could we experiment with new forms of entertainment, and what would that say to us about our audiences and our place in the world as an institution. But for a playwright, our playwright in residence, who is over 400 years old now, what does that look like? So I'm going to share you a series of slides, which is over the past 10 years of my work at the RSC and what we've been doing. And the reason why I'm sort of sharing the past 10 years is because I think sometimes in the arts world, we look at a piece of work and go, right, that's it. We will all make that work now. And that's not how it works. Research and creativity are about a sketchbook and a series of ideas that you keep coming back to, and what leads from a piece of work to another piece of work in terms of what it's trying to say. And also we've had a pandemic, and what does that do, and what does that change in terms of our relationship with each other and our relationship with technology? So I'm going to start back in 2013 and awkwardly try to share my screen now because I'm always an absolute technology black hole when it comes to anything like this. And bear with. Here we go. So I suppose it's important to say that actually how we became an IRO, an independent research organisation, was through the process of this work, and I'll give you those beats on that and what that was about. But we didn't really have any connection to the academic world or the research world in 2013. But what happened was we just came off the back of the 2012 Olympics, so there was a huge amount of investment in culture and creativity. And Shakespeare in particular, and it built connections with Google. And I had a connection with Google, which was like, what would a play look like if it was created just in the world of social media? And back in the day, it was nowhere near as pervasive or as how quick and fast-paced this world is now with TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat. This was an emerging space, and actually we work with a platform called Google Plus, which doesn't exist anymore. But it was, could you create a play that was embodied the world of social media? So we looked at the play Midsummer Night's Dream, and instead of performing in the play in the period of the play over 3 hours, we broke the play up and performed it in the time of the play itself, which is 3 days. And we had key moments in that play which were performed at 8. We decided 8 p.m. on a Friday night was the Court of Theseus, which is the Act 1, Scene 1. And we didn't get back into the real world performance until the forest scenes at 2:30 in the morning. And in between that time, we created an online world that was sharing through created characters in the play that didn't exist in the text, but we felt were in the world of the play. We created those characters, and they were sharing online and on social what was going on in the world of the play. And that culminated not in a broadcast 3-day version of the play. It created multiple pieces of content by the characters, but also we invited real world people to participate with us. And therefore we had 3,000 pieces of content going out around the world in a playful way, and that reached 30 million people on social media. And that was a moment where we went, wow, what can you do with this? And this is a short video of what we did.
me then. Steal forth thy father's house tomorrow night, and in the wood, a league without the town, there shall I stay for thee. Then to the wood he will tomorrow night pursue. Where the wild thyme blows, where oxlips and the nodding violet grows. Snake throws her enamelled skin, weed wide enough to wrap a fairy in. Have offended. Think but this and all men that you have but slumbered here while these visions did appear. So good night unto you all. Give me your hands if we be friends, and Robin shall restore amends.
So that, what do you do with that? What do you do with the fact that when you reach 30 million people, what is the potential of that? Really got us thinking. We have 1,000 people come into our auditoriums, our Royal Shakespeare Theatre every night, but we can reach 30 million people. That sounds pretty amazing. So it really informed where we went next and what we wanted to explore with these new technologies that are coming in, this world that is changing to us. How are we adapting? We saw how film was such a absolute pivotal moment for us as a, you know, in terms of the world of mass media, and yet theatre is still an art form that continues to be relevant. Even so, it's considered such an old art form. So in 2016, it was the anniversary of Shakespeare's death, and to mark that anniversary, we looked at The Tempest, which is his last play and arguably his most innovative play. And I'm going to share with you a video now of what happened in that moment and what we came to. But this piece of R&D came from a note from Greg, who said, what would a digital mask look like? And masks in the time of Shakespeare were these scenes of innovation, of spectacle, and we have notes around audiences being asked to wear jewels and mirrors to glisten against the candlelight. And you can already hear that language is like immersive technology. So these aren't new, we're just working with the tools that we have. And in it, we reached out to Intel and started a collaboration and a series of R&D sprints, which were looking at their technologies, what was capable now in terms of their hardware. And it was clear that you had enough power in these computers to render images in real time, using motion capture for actors. And this was the first performance with real-time motion capture on stage of a fully theatrical production integrated into traditional theatre, game-changing the design, game-changing the roles and responsibilities and what was possible, and also converging gaming, film and theatrical techniques.
3 years ago, we spotted that 2016 was going to be a big Shakespeare year. It's Shakespeare's 400th anniversary of his death, and the Royal Shakespeare Company needed to put on something pretty spectacular. We needed to try and match the magic of Shakespeare's imagination.
I got cast a long time ago for this new production of The Tempest, and the RSC is the home of Shakespeare. Not many actors get the chance to do things like this.
It's taken the best part of 2 years for us to develop this technology with Intel and create an avatar to make Ariel fly, to create a sense of the island being a place where magic was possible.
I boarded the King's ship and get to see two fully fledged performances, one of which is an actor and another is this apparition can fly around the space.
To dive into the fire, to ride.
We have unlimited versions of Ariel. We're able to change his form in many different ways.
We are creating for the first time on stage, real-time, live facial performance capture. And that is quite an extraordinary leap forward.
I and my fellows are ministers of fate.
The actor both becomes the marionette and the puppeteer at the same time. And you can see their physicality completely driving one-to-one this digital character.
We keep working, keep trying to refine the way that Ariel moves, the way he talks, and I have no idea where it's going to go.
The technology that Intel deployed here for the Tempest is big. Take real-time information from a motion capture suit, map that on to a complex digital avatar, and then project that digital avatar out through 27 projectors.
We have their desktop i7s to take marks, skeletal information, and a machine called the Big Beast, which has 120 cores. I've never seen technical setup like this. This place is full of huge amounts of technology, much more so than most film sets that we're on. Generally, on set, you might say, let's fix that in post. We can't do that here. The avatar has to be so robust because that's the final product.
All you can do is create the play with the tools that you have now. And what's delightful about this production is that we have pretty spectacular tools.
Technology affords us is the ability to encapsulate Shakespeare's vision, inclusive of all that magic, that wonder.
The possibilities of what Intel have allowed are only limited by our imaginations.
We're at the forefront of something that other people can take on and build. Who knows where things will be taken in the future?
It's for other creative minds to see what we are doing and take it further.
And that was the production that changed who we could speak to. At scale, this was huge. This was a multi-million-pound partnership. This took, I think, 6 years, maybe not 6, 5 years to come to fruition, through a process of research and development, through that what if mentality, through that people making change in the production process to achieve it. And this was what got the optics of Innovate UK, what got the optics of the research councils, and to also show how you can place research at the heart of performance, of a performance to an audience. There are many complexities within that, but for us, that was a moment where it changed the landscape for us as what was possible. Rather than being a point of study, we were the study itself, and we were defining our own research practices within our processes, and that was quite important. And again, it brought out more curiosity and interest from others around the world to make that happen. And this led to a performance with Magic Leap on a headset. I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to skip this one if that's all right. But it was a performance of 7 Ages of Man on your coffee table, effectively through a headset, an augmented reality headset. So you saw the real world and you saw the performance in front of you. And again, it was building a repository of what if people that were looking at theatre as a real game-changing art form, for new tools and technologies, but new places for theatre to appear. And again, this is a piece I want to share with you. This again was the result, and UKRI had a call to explore the future of live performance, looking at large-scale demonstrators and consortiums. And until that point, as the RSC, we were just working amongst ourselves. And what that resulted in was a shift for us. We wanted to involve our community more and collaboration more, so that we didn't just look at one way of performance, that we were looking multiple ways. So we invited Philharmonia Orchestra, Punch Drunk, Marshmallow Laser Feast, The Factory, Manchester International at the time, to work with us on work packages where we were exploring the future of performance together, but through very specific lenses around festival, around music, around theatre, around immersive. And then inviting the technology companies that we'd been working with, Intel, Magic Leap, and Epic Games at that time, and then a wider range of research organizations that were supporting us. So getting in a multiple people with multiple expertise, and at their best, their expertise. And in that, a pandemic hit, and we had to completely and utterly change how we were exploring live performance. We were going to perform, create a piece in a disused shopping mall in Stratford in person, using huge amount of deeply inappropriate, in terms of, for a pandemic, very tactile technologies and very immersive technologies. And we had to completely pivot that for a remote audience in a very short space of time. But because we had this really strong consortium of people, we were really able to do that. And I think that's testament to when you get very strong research principles and frameworks for discovery, and then how people can shift together using their strengths. And the one difference here is when you're in research mode and then when you're in production mode are often two very different headspaces. So then how you change your teams to be in the right structures and the right frameworks to move into production was also really important. The audiences were not insignificant, 65,000 audiences, 92 countries, over 10 performances, and a testing of commerciality and willingness to pay for this work. So there was lots of things being tested, and there's a website below with all the findings that we shared.
Thanks, Sarah. That was a really brief but incredibly enlightening overview of the massive and extremely exciting work that you have done, the RSC, and with your direction right now, has done over the last decade. I can already see like so many questions coming through us, but I will ask, I will start talking a little bit about sort of like the infrastructure that allows for this research. So we started talking about being an independent research organizations, and the National Archives is one such. And I am interested in the fact that this certification, this qualification, arrived in 2021 after already 7 or 8 years of really exciting work. And I'd be interested in understanding whether there was a point of arrival or a new point of openness towards new ideas. So how becoming a IRO can potentially open up new ways, or allowing for like more types of research, and if this is going to change a bit or bring in new opportunities to RSC.
I think, yeah, I mean, it's been evolving over time. I mean, we put the IRO status was achieved for our learning department and the digital department. And I think it was a culmination of lots of things. But I think what it's opened up for us is that we can now have a formalization of the work that we do every day, and we can go deeper into that, and we can be more rigorous about that, and we can put more frameworks around that, rather than it be something exploratory that's sort of not got some harder edges. And we can put some harder edges around the data that we're looking at, around the impact of that, around the change that we want to make. And so I think that, like, for IROs as well, as it doesn't happen overnight, it takes a long time, and it's a very different output for us as a theatre company. We're a theatre company, we make theatre. We're not necessarily a research company. And so we've got to really think about how that sits with our practice and how we we structure that and how we make sure that the quality of the research is really at a level it needs to be as well. And that takes a lot of time. So yeah, embedding that in the company it does take time. It takes this length of time to make that work.
And clearly this connects us to a question that is pretty central in this, which is funding as well. This project, as you mentioned already, requires big funding, and being an IRO allows for certain types of funding. But I assume that from what you described to us today, the scale of funding for this type of research is pretty high. What is this type of research sustainable?
Good question. So it, yeah, you have to build really long-term relationships. So the sustainability of that is what you say yes to, and then what you say no. Do you know what I mean? What you say no to. But what we find in, we are learning what the research landscape is, and you can't do everything all the time. And you've got to look at, like, the the Audience of the Future was an £8 million project, but we had to match fundraise against that as well. So there is a big fundraising target here around research, but the numbers are much greater than what I would call an average theatre budget is, and they're very different, but they have different requirements. You have additional costs in that research that are really important to fund. So yeah, we have to be really strategic, but the sustainability of that is a big question for me, is how do you get a program of work embedded rather than project by project? Because really it's what's the potentiality of the research is that you can look at the next 10, 20, 50 years. It needs some stability in order to do that. And at these times are difficult.
Yeah, it's the arts are always a little bit under stress in that sense. And another interesting question I have, and I can see echoed by some of the audience, people in the audience, is how this type of research is impacting people's experiences and also creation, I would say. So clearly we are looking at performances that can be performed differently over 3 days at night. People can access them remotely. So this is kind of changing the way the classic performance in the theatre is accessed. But I was also wondering if it is impacting the way these performances are created with actors engaging with technology. So what is the biggest impact that you can see from a creative and audience perspective?
Well, I mean, I think giving the artists space to play with these new technologies, like particularly on something like The Tempest, was the motion capturers were traditionally actually started off in healthcare. It was to, like, navigate and work out people who had strokes, and it helped get them to walk again, and then was used in the film industry. We used it really differently, and giving that space and time for artists and designers and directors to use that technologies, it just gives them another tool in their armory when they're looking at this work. It gives them another thing to it gives them another thing to work with the storytelling, but it doesn't happen overnight. So for example, a lot of the work we've done using real-time technology, particularly with avatars, is that it's rigged to bones, it's not rigged to muscle. So that changes the way an actor has to perform. When you look at immersive, actors are having to perform in terms of large scale physicality, but actually how they're performing in terms of their voice is for film and television, so it's a lot softer. And these are really important nuances when you're taking that work out there, that you need the research time to see how these technologies, how you work with them. You don't just turn it on and it works. You have to it's like a new sculpting material, and that needs time, and it needs, and some of them aren't quite right for live performance. Some of the technologies aren't there, or you don't use everything. So, and then how they embed, like how they technically embed with the infrastructure that you have, traditional infrastructure as well. is a challenge. So all of these things need time and care, but the impacts are huge. It does change the way people make their work. It does make them feel they have more to play with. It does make them think about how they can imagine these stories differently. And then there's a stylistic thing. You know, the styles of performance have changed over the years, and then the design styles have also changed.
And is there a way where you can measure this impact?
Yeah, I mean, it depends the questions that you're asking at the beginning. So, for example, like with Dream, what would doing a play on the internet look like allowed us to see potential reach of, or like virtual audiences being huge. So that was a good question. On Audience of the Future, it was about what is people's willingness to pay. So we had a questionnaire after that, and people said between £8 and £10 for a 20-minute experience. That's really valuable data and information for us to look at commercial modeling in the future, or how to play that. That some of these technologies are still too prohibitively expensive. Actually, they've not landed yet. They're not anywhere near being cost effective enough unless you have some form of sponsorship or support. So we're getting a huge amount of data all the time of what audiences want, how it affects the artist, and then how possible it is for like everyday adoption. Definitely. And also now people are wanting a lot more closer connection. So people are going to live events more than experiencing them virtually because they want to be back in person.
Yeah, surely the impact is big. And I'm kind of mixing a bit of my question and other questions. What about small theaters, for example? Is there any advice that you would say in that respect? Because I can see probably people working in smaller theaters asking what would be an advice, considering they might not have access to this type of connections that RSC has.
Yeah, so we have grants which allow us to share our equipment. So we're thinking about how do we support the wider ecology? We're inviting artists in to do labs with us at the right moments with this technology. So it's challenging though. It's really important not to infantilize or discredit. Like, yes, it's big. It doesn't mean that you should get all the funding. It's sort of like there are some amazing companies that work at smaller scales, but not with any less big ideas or ambition with what's being achieved, and actually sometimes do it better or more meaningfully than the large scale pieces of work. So it can be quite challenging. So we're looking into how we share our equipment, whether that's a high spec laptop or whether that's a projector. So yeah, it's a really tricky thing because people assume that scale means bigger, but actually scale doesn't need to have to be bigger. It can be deeper, more meaningful, more impactful in terms of scale. So again, it's about championing, and which is why the Audience of the Future Consortium is so important, that we work with a company like Marshmallow Laser Feast, who are a much more agile, nimble company that did way more with the grant in so many ways around pushing the innovation.
Yeah, so like all these schemes are interesting, and I think you also RSC is also producing fellowships, offering fellowships for new.
That's right. Yes.
Playwright. I might ask you a difficult question now. It's kind of bringing together different questions, which is about ethical concerns, because there seem to be two areas of not concerns, but questions address these two. One is the ethical concerns about working with these big sponsors that tend to be mostly giant corporation, almost monopolies, rather than portfolio different. But I think you probably just answered that, but we'll get to that. And then on the other side, the energy costs of working with, for example, potentially AI, or in any case, what is the impact in terms of energy on climate change? So on one side, the economic monopoly of some giant corporation, and on the other side, climate change.
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, I think there's always been an ethical issue with lots of sponsorship and such like, and it's become much more complex and complicated, not because it wasn't there all the time, but because we're much more informed, and I think that the world has changed quite deeply. But I also think that those relationships are, yeah, really hard and need way more due diligence than there was previously. I can't remember the second part of your, AI yeah, and AI is a really interesting one. We're getting invited to so many talks around AI at the moment, and what you say one week and what you say another is completely changing. It's moving so rapidly. But for example, the climate cost of doing a chat GPT is like 7 iPhone charges currently. So there's a real sort of optics piece, not only about the contracting and creativity and impact on that, but actually the sustainability of that is a massive issue. So I'd say over the last 20 years, there has been a huge excitement about these technologies and how possible they were. And now we're definitely in the phase of accountability for these technologies and accountabilities for how these technologies will be deployed. And, it's no, the Trump election, most technology companies their shareholders have done very well out of that election, for example, and those optics are much greater now than they actually have been in the past. And I think that there's a bit of disappointment in the world and its relationship with those technology companies also. And I think that's definitely something that's going to increase. So if you look at, our technologies, the new oil companies, it's quite possible they are. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I would like to move back into more like less contentious areas of discussions, which brings us back to Shakespeare, really. I have this interesting question. Are there certain Shakespeare plays that allow for or are more suited for digital experimentation than others? And how do you pick the
Oh yeah, I mean, like Tempest and Dream. I mean, it's easier to do non-photoreal like productions, and so if you've got fairies or any form of spirits, it's just a lot easier to experiment with some of those technologies. But I mean, any play that Shakespeare has put out there he's definitely challenged the human condition. So I'd say thematically and character wise that they've all got really strong sort of propositions to experiment and explore, but you naturally sometimes go to Dream or Tempest or Macbeth or a play like that, which gives you a form of characters in which are not all human to experiment and explore with.
And a related sort of question is, how about research and new creative? I mean, the question is more if research and new creative practices conflict with the traditional production and performance. The question is more about, have artists or producers ever been resistant to embark on project like that, or
Yeah, not everyone's into it, right? Not everyone's into it. Not everyone wants to do it. And there's a lot of skepticism about it. I mean, if you look at, use of image, like most of that technology that you saw had to map an avatar, therefore it had to take a digital image of an actor. Not everyone's keen on that. Also, not everyone's keen on creating work in that way. So there is skepticism. And so that's where you have to be really careful around your ethics, around how you hold people, how you support people through the research, be really clear on where it's going, what it's doing. Like traditional forms of entertainment have very clear rights frameworks for that work. And in this world, it's emerging. So for example, AI, the use of AI in a play, for example, or, all of that, we're having to really seriously think about and consider.
and how this is interesting. So how do you practically juggle between research mode and production mode?
Oh, that's really hard. It's different teams, and that's very difficult. Like, you get a stage manager in, you'll get a production lead in, you get moving from research to production is very challenging. And it shouldn't be, but you have to close some what ifs down in order to go into production. And when you go into production, your stakeholder changes from the research to the audience, and the contract with the audience is absolutely crucial. So when we were having conversations with Intel and Imaginarium about The Tempest, it's like, these shows run and they have to be successful. It can't break. You can't just go on stage and go, sorry, it didn't work. You're breaking the contract with your audience and the paying audience as well. So it moves very quickly from those what ifs and I could make it more innovative if I just put this code in, or if I did that, to we're locking the show in now. If it doesn't work, it gets cut. If it doesn't make sense dramaturgically, it gets cut. And those are the sensitivities that you really need to think about. And you have to have a level of transparency there. And to be fair, you give the creatives as long as possible before they need to make those decisions.
And as you said, you got like two distinct teams sort of, and does all this digital research and production impact the more traditional one, and the more traditional one impact or
Yeah, they're always talking to
Right.
each other. Yeah, if it's going well, they should be talking to each other. The thing about new work or new research is thinking it's not been done before, because guaranteed someone has done it at some point. So it's not over infantilizing the new ideas. And then in terms of the traditional, it's keeping an openness around craft and an openness around innovation of their practice, to be open and welcoming to what the possibilities could be. And you've got to keep both in there, talking to each other. And also that's where you find some really interesting stuff.
And would you say there is anything that you've experimented through in the digital production side of the work done at RSC that has impacted other industries? We mentioned gaming at the very beginning, but is there currently any direct impact you can see as
Good question. I'm not sure I've got an immediate answer for that. I know our work. Yeah, I mean, a lot of what we do is in the 3D space, and I know that a lot of film and television makers have really looked at that and are approaching, for example, animation in much more 3D ways that we've been exploring with for a long time. So there's a little bit of that going on. But it takes time for that impact. And sometimes you don't always know the change you make. Like, you genuinely don't know that what you've put out there is impacted on someone else's practice. It's they're hard things to work out, if you know what I mean, unless they're letting you know.
I would like to ask you on behalf of the audience and myself, if there's any performance you'd love to do, and if there's anything already that you are thinking of for.
We will do something exciting with Macbeth, and I'm excited about that. Can't say any more.
Okay.
It's exciting, yeah.
And I have an early career person who's asking whether there's any recommendation that you or tip that you'd like to do on funding. Are there other schemes or
Yeah, I mean, the fellowships that we've got open at the moment, I mean, it's not a huge amount of funding, to be honest, but it's certainly about being part of a community. But the funding is tricky. Developing your creative practice through Arts Council is another form of funding. It's not research, but definitely it's worth having on people's radars. And then, yes, there are sort of project grants with AHRC, but it's very difficult. It's about, I think, if you're an independent person, it's about how you advocate and embed in an institution that you're in at the moment, or getting allyship with institutions that are exploring similar things.
And looking at finally on the more like
Shakespeare.
not dark side, but like the risk management, let's say. So
Yeah.
it's about question of like potential like hacks or things happening as you are putting on a digital performance. Has there has ever anything been hijacked in a way?
Oh gosh. No, I mean, gosh, we've made some mistakes, but we haven't, it's never been hijacked as such. When we put all the technology in the theatre, which was a horrific amount of technology into the theatre for Tempest, we turned it on and it didn't work. And that was like, oh, so we have those moments, but I don't think we've experienced anything like that. We do a lot of work to navigate how this work comes in, if that makes any sense. You do a lot of work to support the different fears or the different processes that people are working with. That's what takes an awful lot of time. Otherwise, it will never work. People just won't do it.
Yeah. And how could we all be updated about this Secret Macbeth plan or future?
Oh, January. You'll find out in January, but I can't say anymore. Said too much already.
And through, I imagine, the classic social media channels and
Yes.
okay.
Yes.
And I might end with our last sort of creative question, speculative question, which is, what would Shakespeare think of AI and VR?
He would have loved it. He was an absolute, like, if you look at, he was in London, he was exploring, he was meeting all these different discovery people, like, who are coming back from Tempest is based on like stories from shipwrights and people that were bringing back untold riches in the world and stories from around the world. And he was really collaborative. Like, there was a series of writers, and there are so many things in theatre terminology, like rigging, for example, is because riggers from ships used to do the pulleys in the scene changes, for example. Like, he was an absolute polymath and ambitious individual and saw the world with a lens of curiosity and ambition. And I think that he would be absolutely looking for what tools or what would be useful to put his plays on. And I think that's how we've like looked at it now, which is the story, like, is how are these tools and technologies expanding a theatre making toolkit, and how do they serve the artist, and research that. But also the questions now are more expansive. They're about, how does this serve an audience? How does this create meaningful connection in a more complicated world in this moment? So how do we contextualize this? Whereas 10 years ago, we were asking more basic questions. Now we are looking at the complexity. So we're looking at how this all converges together.
Well, that is exciting, and it's nice to know that in a way what you're doing, it is potentially in the vision. We can't be sure, but his work kind of might suggest an openness to research and experimentation. So I would really like to thank you, Sarah, for joining us today and for providing insight into the research being undertaken at the RSC. I again apologize with the audience for this slightly delayed start today, and also for joining us despite this little delay. If you are interested in exploring this topic further and knowing about more collections related to Shakespeare and the history of performance out at the National Archives, we have put together a resource which can access via our methodologies webpage, the link of which has been shared in the chat and will be emailed to you in the following days. That being said, we hope you've enjoyed hearing from us today and from Sarah, and thanks to Sarah again for joining us. We hope that you've been inspired by our methodology series to consider how different forms of practice can provide new perspective, to reflect on how we might respond to archives and collections in creative ways. and also perhaps inspired to embark on your own research journey. Have a great week, and we hope to see you next year.